I didn't want to be a victim. I didn't ask to be a victim. I really hate that word, victim. I really hate that word. It doesn't describe who we are at all.
I was just out of high school, and I remember, it's funny because I remember believing that no one, I can remember saying to classmates that I would never let anyone hit me, ever. And it's just funny how you say those things and it's just not true.
I met my future ex-husband when I was 16. The first time he ever hit me was on my honeymoon. That was the first time he ever hit me. Of course, he hit me with a beer bottle, so when he did it big. But up until that point, we had never had any kind of physical altercation of any kind.
I slowly started seeing signs like he disconnected the house telephone. We lived in a secluded area. I had no friends. I had no transportation. He sold my car. No choice in what we were going to be eating and what meals were to be prepared.
So I was coerced for years to go along with him to nasty, dirty little back hole porn shops and actually sit in the back rooms where they had stalls in there at the time. I don't know if they still do this or not, but where you could sit in there and put a quarter in and watch porn. And it was so degrading to have that just become a regular part of our social life, and then to have to go out in public and sit at dinner with our families and play the happy little wife. And if I ever tried to reach out to those resources and talk about the pain that was happening there, the one time when I did get up enough courage to talk about leaving this man, my father took me out and with great intentions told me that I had made my bed and I needed to lie in it.
I was beginning to believe that all these acts were normal.
I was attacked last April by a neighbor that lived below me. He came out of the apartment one day as I was leaving for work and stood at the bottom of the stairs with a knife and tried to force me back in my apartment. I resisted, and what followed was a knockdown, drag-out, full-on combat situation in a stairwell that was about 3 feet wide. I was stabbed twice in the arm, and I had a laceration on my index finger that I had to get a lot of stitches for later. So I got thrown down not one but 2 flights of stairs during that. I just remember hanging on to the door jamb of his apartment with everything that I had and a finger that I didn't know was still attached. And hooking my leg around the door jamb and thinking, if I can just kick him a little harder, maybe I can get away. But it didn't seem to matter what I did. It didn't seem to matter how many times I kicked the guy in the face. It didn't seem to matter how many times I punched him in the throat. It didn't matter what I did.
I wanted out. I wanted away from everything. But I couldn't go anywhere. I had my 2 kids at home and you just can't walk out.
He started starving me. I lived hiding in a corner in my living room with 5 pairs of clothing on, every blanket and quilt I had, and I had a dog at that time. Her name was Dixie Belle. Well, Dixie Belle kept me warm under all these covers, and I had 3 potatoes to feed me for 3 days, and that was it. No, and so I would let Dixie Belle take a bite first, and then I would take a bite and try to make 1 potato, feed her and I both for 1 day.
He had ripped off my clothes, so I was naked. And it's bad enough to be beaten. It's worse to be beaten when you're naked. There's just something about it. Really what he was trying to do was to beat me into loving him, right? He wanted to come back home. He wanted me to be his wife.
I knew when I was going to get beat. I'd simply start to feel it in the pit of my stomach that when I went home, I knew I was going to be in trouble. It escalated. His favorite thing usually was choking me. He had me on the floor, choking me, banging my head against the floor, and I thought, I wouldn't treat a dog like this.
Our daughter had gotten in trouble, and I had gone in, reprimanded her for whatever it was, and he came back into her bedroom then, and I followed him in, and he had been drinking all day, and he was drunk at the time, and he picked her up by her throat, and it scared me. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't help her, because if I helped, it would just make everything worse for her. A few weeks later, he had gotten angry with me, and he had been drinking, and he put his hands around my neck and said, "I'm mad enough. I want you dead."
He walks to this closet behind him and he pulls out a shotgun. And he places it at my head and he's telling me, well, you're not ever going to leave here again. You don't have to worry about friends or family. You don't have to worry about screaming because nobody's going to hear you. He pulls a shell out of his pocket and he loads the gun up. And at this point, I'm knowing that, okay, he's going to take my life this time for real. My first instinct was to get up as fast as I could and grab the end barrel of the gun to keep it away from my body. And when I look up, he has the gun pointing towards my face. So again, my first instinct was to take my hand and to block the shot. The gun had went off. All I see is smoke. My ears are ringing. So I look down at my body and there are no holes anywhere. There's nothing that could stop me from running or getting away. He jumps down the stairs, slams the door shut, and pushes me backwards and tells me that he's going to kill me. Where do I think I'm going? So I got some extra strength, and I was able to knock him down into the basement of the split-level home. And once again, a voice tells me to turn around. As soon as I turned around, he was standing directly behind me with the gun pointed towards my back. Well, at this point, I was just so afraid, I really didn't know what to do. But I thought if I could squeeze myself between the wall and the door as far as I could, just maybe it wouldn't go directly through. And it worked, because this time the gun went off. The bullet went through the flesh of my arm, through a few layers of skin on my chest, and through a door paneling. And when I seen that still there were no holes in my body, I could still run, I could get away. So I opened the door, I took out running as fast as I could.
When he learned that I was leaving, he beat me and raped me. And then the next morning when he came out and found me sitting in the chair, I was just waiting for daylight because he had broken my glasses, actually shook the contacts out of my eyes. They were hard contacts at the time, but shook me so hard that my contacts popped out of my eyes. And we lived way out in the boonies in the middle of nowhere. So I was just waiting for daylight so I could try and walk away.
Right. Now I had broken ribs. I had all kinds of cuts and just bruises that ended up, I had a huge sack of blood hanging down. It was just this big bag hanging down here that later, it took about 3 months for those to go away, all those bruises. It spread out in my arm. It looked like I had this sort of magenta colored sleeve. My entire arm, it spread out. I could tell he was starting to fall asleep. And so I would just creep a little bit towards the edge of the bed. And I'd wait to see if he was going to move. And I'd creep a little bit more until I finally got to the edge of the bed. And by this time he was just starting to snore a little bit, so I knew he was asleep. And I stood there for a minute. And I had to think about what was I going to do. Because I knew he was never going to leave me alone. No matter how much time he went to jail, no matter how much whatever, he would never leave me alone. I tried everything there was to try, And I took a look at myself. I stood back and I kind of looked at myself and how bad I looked, how badly I was beaten up. And I thought I could kill him. If I got that serrated knife, that big knife in the kitchen, and I just stabbed him as many times as I could, as fast as I could, before he could do anything, I could kill him. And I looked at my body and I thought, 3 years. I won't get more than 3 years. And I really had to decide, you know, at that moment if that's what I was going to do. And then I just thought, you know, that can't be the person who killed my son's dad.
I could sleep at night after they arrested him, but the ordeal that I had to go through with prosecuting him was so much more victimizing and exposing and humiliating than the actual assault. I never imagined that I would feel, as someone who has been a survivor of violent crime, that I would feel as though I was the one on trial. My background and my motivations and everything that I did and every decision that I made was under scrutiny, under criticism. Some of the most horrible trauma that I experienced in this entire ordeal was just having to relive those things. Having to recount every second, every minute of the most horrible 2 hours of my life. And to have it be analyzed and judged and pulled apart and reframed. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. You know, before I was assaulted, when I heard about violent crime and sexual assault and domestic violence and heard about women who didn't report, I just couldn't understand why somebody wouldn't. Wow, that was a crime committed against you. Why wouldn't you report it? Well, you know what? I understand that now, because prosecution and justice is horribly expensive for the victim. It cost me so much to put this man behind bars. And it wasn't fair. And the system worked for me. But there are lots of women out there for which the system does not work.
I'm ashamed of what happened to me.
It's my fault that I got raped.
I've been sexually assaulted 3 times in my life. And I always felt that it was my fault.
Sometimes I still think it's my fault. Because I should have got up. He told me to get up.
It was just easier to blame myself than it was to blame the other people.
If you ever got raped, please don't blame yourself. Because once you blame yourself, you start believing it. And you believe it, and people may tell you that it's not your fault. You find that hard to believe when you're believing something else.
I didn't do anything wrong. And you can tell yourself that as much as you want to, but until you believe it, it's just words. And it took me a long time to truly believe that I hadn't done anything wrong.
And the craziest part of all of it, and some people might not get this part, but I wouldn't change anything, okay? Because I wouldn't be who I am today, right? If I hadn't gone through that. I don't know who I'd be. I don't think I'd be a terrible person or anything, but I wouldn't be doing what I do. I wouldn't have the impact that I have, and I wouldn't have made the changes, at least locally, that I have, right? For some people. So I figure it's my duty to put my ripple out there.
I wouldn't wish away, as odd as that may sound, I would not wish away any of these events out of my life because they're part of who I am today. They're part of what my strength comes from, is knowing what I'm capable of dealing with, and that I choose not to be a victim. I will not allow someone to have power over me. I came upon the person who did the domestic violence a few years ago. I hadn't seen him in about 10 years, and I went up and hugged him. Really, he gave me a gift in an odd kind of way.
I need to use my voice. I didn't talk about what happened to me for over 30 years. I kept it hidden, didn't tell anyone. There are a lot of women out there who can't talk about it for one reason or another. Many reasons. And I can. It's scary a lot of times. It's scary right now. It's important that I speak for those who can't.
But I was terrified that we would just become statistics. That we would just become statistics. And it would be a story of, one more story of a woman who was killed by a upstanding man. So I really feel like if not one more good thing happens in my life, I feel so blessed because we survived. Because we survived that. And we're not that statistic anyway. We're not that one.